Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here tonight at the Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory. We're going to go ahead and get started. Our speaker tonight is Bruce Feagle. He's a wonderful person. His creativity defies categories. He's a visionary and an industry pro. He operates a multidisciplinary film production agency born of innovative thinking. He's worked in capacities ranging from musician, audio engineer, recording engineer, director of photography, editor, and director, having worked with numerous music and film legends. He has bridged the gap between computers, music, and video. His musical experience and ear play a role in his creative approach in a happy merger of left and right brain. But he's done more than just these fun things. He's done some very specific things for us. If you've been inside the Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory, the Observatory has a few things that he has directly put his creative thinking on. In particular, the Integrated Space Theater. It was something that he came up with and offered to have made with us, and we got that entire project built through his guidance, as well as a number of shows that we show in there are ones that he produced himself. So join me in thanking Bruce Feagle as you enjoy the foundations of astrophotography.
I'm going to kind of hide over here behind this, and those lights are perfect. I can't see anybody out there. So thanks for coming, everybody. One of the things I'd like to kind of disclaim as we start this is there are bunches of ways to do this kind of stuff. As we were kind of talking about this up front here, there's all kinds of choices and things you can do and how you can approach astrophotography. This is my way. There's an enormous amount of resources online that help that can show you all kinds of different things, and you can choose your ways, and I'm happy to share my successes in trying all those kinds of things too as we talk about stuff. So astrophotography is the art of and science of capturing images of celestial objects. It requires specialized equipment like telescopes and cameras with long exposure capabilities, mounts that track the sky, and motors for focusing, and filter wheels. Motors aren't 100% necessary, but they sure are helpful if you want to automate it. I prefer to sleep at night since I have day gigs, so it's difficult to sit up all night with these things and then actually go out and do anything else other than recover. So the motors help me automate the whole system so that once I set a sequence up, I go to bed and then kind of check on it a few times at night. Sometimes the special filters allow us to see sort of our specific frequencies or narrow slices of the spectrum of light. Like this one here in particular is it's slices of hydrogen alpha, sulfur 2, and oxygen, which are just, you got a broad spectrum of light here, and we're just going to sample a few pieces in here. And what that is it's the emission lines that are happening within these nebula. So they're glowing like a neon light, but really dim. And so that's where the reds you see in pictures and the blues and all the different colors kind of come from, is this glow that's really way off in the background. But the images are beautiful, but they have a significant role in astronomical research. By allowing scientists and enthusiasts to document and study distant cosmic phenomena, astrophotography helps expand our understanding of the universe, providing insights into the formation of stars. So that's 300,000 to 500,000 stars-ish, somewhere in there. Also, it gives us a chance to see how galaxies interact with each other and the gravitational issue when they get close to each other, pulling each other apart, and actual lensing and stuff like that. So it's an extension of the physics of the universe. They actually can see it in operation. Astrophotography has a rich history that dates back to the early 19th century, and with the first known image of the moon taken in 1840 by John William Draper. This is a restored version of that image. Unfortunately, the original it's just sort of faded away. But the initially long exposure times made it challenging to capture celestial objects in detail. So over time, advancements in photographic techniques and technology transformed astrophotography. In the late 1800s, dry plate photography allowed for clearer, more detailed images, and astronomers began using it to capture star fields and planetary detail. So Great Orion, the nebula in Orion, I think that's like 1800s, 1870 or something. I can't read the bottom of it. But 20th century saw a revolution with the advent of film photography, which coupled with improved telescope optics allowed astronomers to document the sky with greater accuracy. One of my favorite parts about this image here, you can see there 1919 Mount Wilson, is if you notice off to the side over there, the stars aren't quite round. Makes me feel kind of a lot better trying to figure this out, that they also struggled in the early days on how to get good polar alignment. So today, astrophotography continues to evolve with technologies like CCDs and now CMOS, which has come in very heavily. Imaging chips have paved the way for the future of space-based telescopes. You couldn't send a film camera up to that because how would you get the film back? So such as the Hubble and more recently the James Webb. And also advances in software that can process and enhance images, offering unprecedented views of the universe. Astrophotography has profound applications and impacts on both science and art. In science, it serves as a crucial tool for astronomical research, allowing scientists to capture and analyze distant cosmic phenomena. So what you're kind of looking at there is the massive black hole at the center of Centaurus A has jets flying off to the side of it. And they would have never known this without long exposure photography and seeing the results of it. High-resolution astrophotography also provides essential data on the structure and evolution of the universe. I don't know, first time I saw this one, it kind of smoked my mind, the fact that every single dot that's not have that diffraction spike is a galaxy. And I believe there are well over, thousands inside that one image. And this is the early deep field one. They've gone a lot deeper and a lot further than that these days. But in art, astrophotography bridges the gap between the observation and creative expression. So we're allowed a little bit of space for color and how to make something look dynamic in the art aspect of it. Astrophotographers combine technical precision with artistic composition, creating images that create interest in astronomy and space science among the public. And that's the greatest thing about astrophotography. It's advertising what's in the sky above you. And it just goes on and on and on and on. And you can see some of the detail in this image in that bottom section right there. That's called the running cheetah. Everything gets a name these days. And the reds and oranges you see are the hydrogen emission line, the blues are the oxygen, and there might be a little green inside there a little bit, that's the sulfur that comes out. But it's mostly, and that type of narrowband photography, the best part about it is it's creating contrast between the different visual elements so that they really stand out. That's why narrowband photography tends to have a ton of detail and a lot of contrast. So this all started for me in a cornfield in Florida at 9 years old. I was walking around, we were on vacation there for a while, and it's the first time I noticed the Milky Way galaxy in the sky above us. I thought it was a cloud or something, and it just sort of grabbed me in that moment, and I had no idea what I was really looking at until my dad kind of let me know what I was seeing. And ever since then, I think I got binoculars that Christmas. I would spend hours and hours out in the fields just looking up. And then we moved here to the desert area in 1970. And we used to have amazingly dark skies here. So it continued. We lived out in Thousand Palms, and there was no light pollution around us. Even the cities that were all over here, there was open desert between everything. So like Rancho Mirage, you would drive 1.5 miles and get to Palm Desert, but you'd be driving through open desert. So the binocs were great, but I never really got a chance to look through a telescope until I was 20. And once I did that, it was a friend's house. I was a musician at the time. And his mom had a telescope similar to this Newtonian right there. And she said, she gave me permission to take it outside and just play with it. And I think I spent the whole night out there just messing around. I didn't really know how to align it. I didn't know how to do anything with it. I would point it at things that I thought I'd see in the finder scope and look at sky, the star clusters and different things that just randomly finding. I had no idea what they were called. I didn't know I was looked at, but I was hooked. And it was amazing to see all that stuff, but everything was black and white. Our eyes just are not sensitive enough to see the color. On a really big telescope in a very clear night under a very dark sky, you might see the red, pink hues of Orion because it's a very bright object. But it's still, our eyes just don't have that sensitivity. Then the Hubble came out. And once again, my mind was rocked. I saw that image and I was like, oh my gosh. I just could not believe that I was looking at something like that. And at the time, I was starting to get into it a little bit more. The CCDs, this is the mid-90s, were really out of reach for hobbyists. It took a serious investment to be able to do anything like that. And I had seen film astrophotography and tried it. And it was very complex and kind of expensive to do. And I was just trying to do lenses and, small little telescope and just, I didn't have a guider, just trying to get the polar alignment set and take pictures. But you'd expose film, for a night or two or whatever and have several rolls. You had no idea what you got. You'd send it off, and then once the lab came back, it looked like that. That wasn't that fun, especially when you're considering how much you were spending for, lab work to have a bunch of pictures come back. And that's a little digitized too. So then a miracle happened. Somebody figured out a way to take a webcam from Philips, add the Steve Mogg adapter, who was in Australia, cutting these out of plastic, and you could take that and put that in your telescope, and it would actually show you a video image of what you were looking through. It was great for planets and some, like Orion, very bright, deep sky objects. And the software was just kind of coming along at the time. It would take that capturing all those frames and try and merge them together to create a single color image. But it was still, it's all right. But then somebody figured out how to take that same camera, you do a little tweak to it, and now it's a long exposure webcam. So there's a lot of different smart people all across the country who were figuring out ways to take that little teeny webcam and make it a real astro camera. Now, the challenge here is the chip on that thing is very tiny. So you had to really work at getting objects into view and had to really stick with very short lenses, maybe 400 millimeters, 600 millimeters, not very long, because it would be difficult to get the objects on the chip. Now, this is great for planets because, they're not that big when you start looking through telescopes, but that small chip would be able to amplify them. So the next mod that they came out with, they figured out, is a way to cool that camera. So there's my monster I built, and it is that same Vesta Pro camera. It has the long exposure modification, and then I removed the CCD from the board and put a piece of copper under it. It fit right under it, and then that piece of copper came out and was attached to a Peltor cooler. And it did all right. It did all right. I took, to make the copper, I just cut a copper water pipe and then flattened it and then, sawed out the chunks that I wanted and put it together. It actually worked really well. And in those days, it was kind of fun to be messing around with stuff. Whoops, went too far. Sorry. There we go. So the flip mirror was to help me find objects and get them on the chip. And that sort of metal thing is coming off there. As Meade at the time was offering an upgrade for one of their equatorial mounts that you could make it go to. So it was a little computer handheld thing, and if you could make these motors fit on your mount, you could make it work too. So I figured out a cheap, easy way. I'm kind of about simplicity and trying to find the easiest way to make something. So I didn't really care how it looked. I just wanted it to work. So this system actually did quite well for me. And like you saw a moment ago, it takes pretty decent pictures. And so that's like 1999, 2000, first playing with CCD imagery. And now I'm really hooked. I can't stop. And those were all from that one system. Now that I'm completely hooked, we upgrade. The gear is updated. I've got a Vixen GP, a Starlight Express camera, and AstroArt, and it was on. The telescope's in the yard. I'm using Timbuktu to remotely into my laptop. I'm a tech nerd, so I try to find all the little fun tools. And this was really a fun setup and a fun time for this set. And so that's kind of where I went. The rigs have all changed many times since then, so I won't bore you with the family pictures. So let's start about what you can do with the types of systems we have out here in front of us. The furthest one over there on your right is a basic camera. Well, it's a decent modern camera. It's about 3 years old with a lens on it. This could be almost any camera you can imagine, and just sitting it on a tripod and pointing it to the sky. Now, the things you've got to watch out for here is the amount of lens that you can use. So with the sky moving above you continuously, the longer the lens, the more likely you're going to see the stars blurring like we saw in that one Mount Wilson image. So my experiences showed me that you can get 20, 30-second exposures, maybe up to a minute, as long as you don't go over 24 or 30 millimeters. If you're pushing into 50, you're probably 30 seconds, 20-second exposures before you'll start seeing the stars. The longer you get, the shorter that exposure needs to be, or you will see the stars trailing. So the kind of things you can expect from that is this. That's a single 20-second exposure in the middle of the Mojave Preserve, the back way to Vegas, if you know it. Hole in the wall. I don't know if you know where those places are out in the middle of the desert, but this was a late night of traveling. I had to actually go to Idaho, and I'd left in the night so that I would camp out someplace like this. I just pulled over, set the tripod out there, turned on the interval meter that's built into the camera, set it for 20 seconds, and went to sleep in my car. Got up the next morning, put it on the car, and drove off. Ended up with some nice stuff, and it's a fun little time lapse too, but mostly I was going after something like that. Another thing, the recent aurora. That is just a tripod, 10-second exposure of the sky. You see I got stars, and I got a lot of color from that aurora that happened in May. Another little lucky benefit, and I love luck, is a car about a mile away was coming around a corner and lit the scene just enough to give me some highlights on the leaves and on the ground around it. So it separated it. And so that's a lucky accident. Another one, just a tripod shot. That's a 30-second shot, like ISO 1600 at 18 millimeters. It's not very long. But it sure turned out well. The foreground, you can see the foreground pretty good too because it was still the first quarter moon. The moon hadn't just set yet, so it was just down just enough to light the foreground to make it really kind of cool. The next type of setup is over here. This one is a star tracker. This one is the Vixen Polari. It's been around for a few years, but what it does is it actually moves the speed of the sky. And it has several different settings on it to where if you were wanting to do solar or if you wanted to do the moon and track the moon, it's different rates, different speeds. So it can manage that. The one thing is, though, you kind of need to roughly polar align them so that it can track the sky as best as possible. You can get exposures up to 50 millimeter, 70 millimeter in length of lens for up to a minute, but that might be about it. It does come with a system to polar alignment, but I found these old polar scopes like this, they're very complex. You got to really understand how to set the dials so it'll show you where the Polaris is in, and you can't do it with the camera on it, so you're doing it. And I found that the type of mount that it's, you just kind of loosen it and move it around, it wasn't steady enough to be able to get an accurate, alignment with this. It just was wiggly too much. And so I found that they put this little hole on the side of it. And as long as you could put Polaris in that little hole looking through it, you're good enough. It was actually so much more simpler. And now that you're tracking the sky, you can actually take multiple images of that sky and combine them. And so I played around with stuff like this. So this is cheating a little. This is a composite. What I did is standing in front of this is out in Borrego Springs in the middle of the desert. They have all these sculptures in places. And I got on this side of the dinosaurs, took a single picture, and then I walked past them, and so that they weren't in the frame any longer. And then I turned on the sky tracker and then let it go for like 30 minutes. And went and sat down in my car and watched it do its thing. And then later on, I combined all, and it was about 30 minutes, let's see, of 60-second exposures. So I had 28 or 30 pictures that I used post-processing software to combine them together. And you can notice from the previous images to this how much more detailed and more you have of the actual Milky Way, and that's because of that added exposure. The longer you can expose, or that might be not the right way to put it, you tend to expose for the light pollution and the lighting element around you. So I experimented several times to find out how long I could really go until the sky starts to blow out. You know, you start to see the whiteness and the black areas, and that's too much. So you find that the longest exposure you can deal with, and then you take a bunch of them and use software to combine them, and now you're creating a virtual 30-minute exposure. A lot of the software packages that do that simply, you can find some free ones out there even. And even stuff like Lightroom will actually do this kind of stacking. And then I thought, well, let's go one step further. This is all taken from this location, but some friends had a concert in the Joshua Tree Park, and there's this really cool little stage. I cannot remember the name of this area, but it's over there. It's kind of close to the 29 Palms entrance. And so while they were playing, I took a nice wide shot, and then as it got darker, I turned on the tracker. Everybody had left, and I just shot the Milky Way, and then composited all that together. You can really tell it's a composite because in the clouds you can still see stars. If I was really trying to hide something, you'd probably try to hide the fact that where the stars begin and all that stuff. But it just sort of hit me as like, oh, I like it. It's art. There's no science here, but it was fun, and it made an album cover for my friend's band. So the next step, yes, sir. So the next one in the middle here is, I would call it a glorified star tracker. It's just a high-end star tracker. It looks like an equatorial mount, because it is, but it's really meant to be like the Polari, but now an upgraded version of it. And it's surprisingly good. I got it for the solar eclipse that happened back in April. And then when I discovered the solar eclipse crosses the meridian, does everybody know what the meridian is here before I do that? It's the point in the sky that goes from north to south that's directly over you and right here. So equatorial mounts don't like crossing the meridian a whole lot. They got to flip over and come back the other way. Well, I wanted to do a time lapse of the solar eclipse, and I couldn't stop and wait for a minute for the mount to rearrange itself, so I ended up getting a different mount for that. But ended up keeping this because it turned out that it's really good. And what makes it really good is it's Wi-Fi. It can run off of AA batteries or battery pack if you wanted to. You can plug a computer into it and it'll control it. It can have a hand controller. But because of the Wi-Fi stuff that's built in, they have a really great app. And it's really simple to connect to it and to your phone and when you're out in the middle of nowhere. And it has go-to once you align it. And it's the simplest polar alignment process I've ever seen on any mount. So you can see in the image on the right there, what it is, the app itself will show you where Polaris should be. And then all you do is you look in its scope and you make the adjustments and you move it around until Polaris gets in that spot. The challenge, though, is how do you find Polaris first? You got to kind of know where it is. Several ways to do that. And that's, we'll talk about that here in a second, and knowing the sky enough to be able to find it. Another simple way is just take your phone out, pull up the compass, find north, and make sure it's pointed that way. And the compass app will actually tell you the coordinates you're at, and it'll give you your latitude. So we're here at 33-ish, and so all you would do is you would lift, there's notes on the side of it to show you how high it's up. You'd line it up to 33, make sure it's pointed north. And when you look in the scope, it'll be the brightest star you see. And then you just do the fine-tuning to put the star on its little circle inside there. And the app itself, as you can see at the bottom, it's got a great illuminator. It's lit. It truly is the simplest polar alignment setup I've ever seen. And when you do that with this system, no tracking on it at all, it's very accurate. So that's a 70 to 200 lens on a regular camera, and I think I took maybe an hour's worth of pictures there, and there was no guiding, and you can see the stars are pretty round. It's not bad. You see the walking noise that's in there a little bit, and that's something that a camera that's not cooled, or the noise that the chip produces, it doesn't go away. You can't get rid of it, unfortunately, this type. So that's what that is. But there's ways to hide that. But that's just a regular, as a star tracker. But I found out if I put the telescope that's on it now, it can guide and it can take pictures even longer. So a normal star tracker, I would say 70 mil, 100 mil is about the maximum, the longest you'd want to go. Well, this one I'm up to 340 millimeters. The telescope that's on it right now took that picture and from my backyard and on that mount. The beauty is it's so light in the morning. I just walk out, pick it up, walk it in. That next night, I've marked the ground where those things are. I come out, set it there, do a quick check with the polar. It's set it, and then do it again. Really helpful in the sense of saving your back and making it easy enough to where you want to do it over and over again. So it also, same system, full frame of Andromeda. So I think since April, that's what I've been shooting with until recently, was that setup. And that's because of its ease of use, its light, and I didn't feel like it was difficult to set up the next night. It just plopped back into place and we were rocking and rolling. The next setup here, which you see here, and this is it all fully rigged up. I'll tell you what all this stuff is going on there. But this is now the next level up, and there's so much going on here. So the mount that everything is sitting on, which is this black piece on the bottom down here, is utilizing a newer technology. Well, it's not newer technology. It's newer technology for astrophotography, but it's been around for a while. It's called strain wave gearing. And what this does is it allows the mount itself to carry a heavier load and itself not be as heavy. So if you can see the system here that's a little bit further to your left, the bigger one, that's traditionally what you would, if you were doing longer focal length type of photography, you needed something heavy so that it was stable and that it could balance out this heavier weight of a whole telescope and camera system. The strain wave systems now can do that without counterweights. So you see that system there without a counterweight. It actually will carry this bigger telescope as well. Its maximum weight without a counterweight is 44 pounds, and this system right here turns out about 36, 37 pounds when it's fully loaded. And so when I first got that, I immediately put the heavier big one on it and tested it out, and it did really great. So the camera system here also, as we were kind of talking about this a little while ago, it's a mono camera with a filter wheel set up, and there's also a smaller pickoff system in there called an off-axis guider. And what that does, and you kind of see it here better than you can see it in the picture, there's this little red knob sticking out the backside right here. That's a secondary camera. That's not the primary camera. That camera is there only to guide the mount system to maintain the frame that you're shooting over long periods of time. And what this does is it removes any inaccuracies that you might have in your polar alignment, as well as the engineering of these systems. Even though they're really good now, they still have a little wiggle-woggle to them. And so what the guiding system does is it helps remove that. And it's giving corrections to the mount depending on the length of your guide exposures. In my case, about every second or every second and a half. It's telling it slow down, speed up, slow down, turn left, turn left, turn left, slow down, speed up, slow down, constantly through the whole night. So it maintains its position. It's locked on a single star. And so everything else that the main camera sees doesn't move, ever. So you can go through multiple filter wheels, even the next night, and all that stuff, and it will lock in automatically on the best star that it needs to go with. Along those lines also, focusing these types of systems. In your camera lenses and stuff like that, there's no real easy way. Autofocus is not, I've been frustrated. You hit the button and it's like in and out of focus, in and out. It can't find the stars because there's not enough contrast between everything. It's used to more of a normal scene of things. So I just put it in manual and look at it, and some well, at least my cameras do, when you start turning the manual focus, it will zoom in on the screen a little bit so that you can see what you're doing. And you just kind of dance around the outside and the inside of focus, and you'll see the star get bigger, smaller back, and then you just settle on where the star is the smallest. Usually at these wide focal lengths, that's plenty. But when you get up here in these others, it's, unless you're really comfortable and have done a lot of focusing, and there are tools like masks that will help you find your focus. I've gotten to the point, I'll just stick a motor on it the first time I get it and go outside and let it try to just find the focus itself. So how autofocus systems work on on telescopes, it's the same sort of thing. You're pushing the focus point from way out of focus, past focus, and then back out of focus. And what it does is it measures the size of the star, is the simplest way to do it. It goes out of focus, and then it takes a picture, and that's reading. And then as it gets closer to focus, it reads that it's getting a smaller star. And then as it passes that, it creates this sort of curve of where the focus is, and then it knows the motor needs to be on the focuser right here at the bottom, and it zooms over to that spot. And it's the closest you're going to get to focus that I found. I can't even... I've tested against the masking systems. There's a batten-off mask you can put on that when you're out of focus, the star turns into a big diffraction thing. And when you're out of focus, one of the lines is up here, and then as you get closer to focus, it crosses to the middle and then goes away. So the idea is you make this one line up. And on the next talk, we'll see more of that kind of thing. Today we're going to just talk about a lot of the basics and how, what kind of things are. The next talk will be more about acquisition, and that involves focus as well as polar alignment and a bunch of other goodies. But the focus part with a focus motor really is a time saver, and especially with over the night, during the nighttime, temperature change happens, sky conditions change, and so the focus will change on you. And so it's good to have the system stop every now and then and perform a refocus, and then you stay focused all night long. And that's that kind of rig, and I can point things out. I also have external guide cameras kind of set up on these other two just to show what that looks like as well, because sometimes they have their own lens. You can see the little telescopes on top of these two big ones over here. I just prefer the off-axis guiding. It tends to be a little more precise because you're guiding at the same focal length as the telescope is taking a picture. So if there's any movement of a star, it can correct for it, and the main camera actually never sees the correction. And that sort of little black thing in the back there is, I put that on it when I'm shooting because Newtonians are notorious for having light leaks. And so that just covers the back end of it where there's something not covering it. So if light in my backyard happens to eke in, it won't get past that. So, so that's kind of that rig. And you can expect stuff like this. Wow, that looks weird on that picture. So this was an experiment. I was trying to do RGB and then add hydrogen alpha to it, and it just made the M81 sort of Bode's Galaxy look like it's got... measles or something. But it worked really great for the other one because there's this huge flare of material that comes off the side of that galaxy that's really what I was after. But, coming up again, though. Here we go, wintertime. I'm going to be back at that one. But it's quite capable of doing some really other great images. This is an 800 millimeters focal length. Elephant trunk on the side over there, and then a part of the Veil Nebula over here, one of my favorites. It's a xenomorph, or it's the Joker, or it's, whatever you see. That's part of I love looking as like a Rorschach image. What do you see in there? There's so many patterns that sort of leap out at me that I get really excited about. Here's a Rosetta again, this time at that same focal length, but in hydrogen alpha and oxygen. Then we get to the big gun. So this is a 1700 millimeter lens at f6. And when I say those kinds of things, it's the same thing when you talk about a camera lens, but it's prime lens. A lot of lenses are zoom, so they say they're 24 to 100 or whatever. These are prime focal lenses. They don't zoom anymore or anything like that. Sometimes you can add optics to them that will change that a little bit, and it's possible, but they're really meant to be just single focal length type lenses. And you can see it on it's on the big thing. It's got the same camera system. I basically share the camera between these three. I don't put out multiple systems. It's too much to manage. I'd rather just, I focus on one object at a time, and then I go out and shoot it. And especially if I'm going to travel somewhere, I don't want to carry all this. I'm going to pick one, and we're going to go someplace fun or dark and cool. Usually in the summer, I'm up like Hemet or something. But this system is heavy, especially with this CGX. The mount that it's sitting on right now is probably 60 pounds with the weight, and with another 36 pounds on top of it. Not friendly to move, and as I get a little older, I'm just tired of lifting heavy stuff. So that's the reason we're headed towards that other mount there these days, so that I still have the desire to want to drag this out to places. So, but amazingly, it works really good. This is a Dow Kirkin telescope, and basically it's the same sort of optical design that we have in the plane wave that's in there, just smaller. Whereas this is 10 inches, that one, I don't know, 1.7 meters, or something like that. I could be wrong. Somehow, 700, I'm sorry, it's a 700, right? CDK 700. So here we have, I want to call it, it's not the cocoon, my brain. What is this? The crescent, right? Yeah. So I just love that blue hue around the outside of it. So there's oxygen element, emission lines. There's material floating away from this. It's a supernova remnant. It's something after a star went boom, and a big boom, and it's not that far from us. But then there's the bubble, and I fell in love with this telescope when I first started using it, just because it gave me such the detail. And this is where that Rorschach part is coming in. You can see off the side how the different structures of the way the gas and how light plays with it too, because even though there's sections that are getting dark off the back over there, that doesn't mean that there's not something there. It just means there's not a star that's energizing that material and creating that glow that's happening right here. And then the Running Man. This is coming back winter. That's something that sits right above Orion. Another fun image. So, understanding the night sky. Oh, cool, I can see it moving. So, constellations. People of nearly every culture have pretty much identified patterns they saw in the sky. Is it going to go? Bink. There we go. And given it, names. We usually refer to these patterns in the night sky with names like Pegasus, Andromeda, and Orion as constellations. But the constellation is actually a region of the sky with well-defined borders. The familiar patterns like you see here are ways to help us find the constellation. They live inside the constellation. They're not the constellation. That becomes more like this. And the names and borders of the 88 official constellations were chosen in 1928 by members of the International Astronomical Union. Most of the IAU members lived in Europe or the United States, so they chose names familiar with the Western world. But they still kept a lot of the stuff that came from antiquities in the past too. If you can recognize the patterns of 12 or so constellations, which is the zodiac even, the sky will become familiar to you as your own neighborhood. You'll start to figure out, you can see the seasons. You'll know, hey, there's Orion. That means it's winter, that kind of thing. And they change throughout the year. The best way to learn them is to just go out and be under them. And it definitely helps, though, to use a sky viewing app on your phone or something to help you identify them up to the point to where all of a sudden you're going to start recognizing them as where they are. And knowing the constellations and the brightest stars in them helps you when you need to find the North Star Polaris if you don't have your phone on you. The funny thing about Polaris is Polaris, commonly known as the North Star, is not perfectly aligned with the Earth's north celestial pole. Though it is very close, it's currently sitting at about 0.7 degrees away from the true north axis. So meaning it traces a small circle around the pole rather than staying fixed. So Polaris is not exactly where you need to be, it just gets you close. This misalignment occurs because Polaris, like all stars, isn't stationary. It's part of a dynamic galaxy where stars move due to their own motions and gravitational influences of other celestial bodies. And as we kind of zoom in there a little bit, you can see the one grid line is actually where the north celestial pole is and how close Polaris is to it. Now, over the years, long periods, the position of Polaris is relative to Earth's axis changes due to precession, a slow wobble in the Earth's rotational axis that takes about 26,000 years to complete. So imagine you spun a top, and Earth's not doing this, but what happens is it's kind of wobbling as it spins. And so that's what the Earth is doing. It's not actually sitting directly on its axis. It's got a little bit of a wobble as it comes around. So historically, its position has shifted, and thousands of years ago, a different star named Thuban served as the pole star. And you can kind of see it off to the right there, and the timing ago where it was and where we are now. As a result of precession, Polaris will eventually no longer be the North Star, and other stars will take its place over the millennia. So in about 14,000 AD, it'll be over by Lyra, and Vega will be the brightest star closest to the North Celestial Pole. And tonight, Vega's up, and you can kind of see it, and you'll see where Lyra is, and it's nowhere near where you think, from the North Pole, you'd be like, oh, there's the North. It's over here. So, so it's a long ways apart. It's not a small wobble. Light pollution. The excessive or misdirected artificial light from urban and suburban areas significantly impacts astrophotography. It brightens the night sky, drowning out the faint light of distant stars, galaxies, and nebula, making it difficult to capture clear and detailed images. Artificial light interferes by creating a hazy glow, reducing contrast and obscuring fine details. What you're looking at there is the sky in my backyard. That's College of the Desert off in the distance over there, and you saw it go past where I'm kind of off to the right there. And you can see that haze, that impact that haze has, and only the brightest stars are kind of there. And the camera I used to shoot that with, it was a 20-second exposure, so it showed off as much of the stars as it could grab. But the rest you can see as you get closer to the horizon, it's washed out. And there are a lot of simple ways that this kind of light pollution can be controlled to an extent. And cities across the U.S. and the world have begun adopting dark sky rules in some cases where what would really help is just have a cover over the light so the light is directed down, not to the sky. And so that's towards the mall and other places or all around us. You can see the light beams just firing off into the sky, pretty much destroying, if you sit in your backyard, any real good view of anything other than the brightest stars that are out there. So what do? To counter these effects, get out to a remote, dark sky location far from the city lights. Even far into the desert like this has light pollution on the horizon, as you can see down there. That's Palm Springs. I think I'm about 6 miles outside of Pioneer Town at this spot. I found a nice little place. I just found a dirt road, turned off onto it, and found a little place I could pull off and set up. And it was beautiful above, once you got about 15 degrees, 20 degrees above the horizon. But, you still, no matter where you go around here these days, you have to really get way out to not have any impact of light pollution. So some of the things we can kind of do to counteract this is filters. So utilizing some light pollution controlling filters, what they're doing is they're actually trying to filter out sodium light sources, which are street lights most of the time. It's those yellow street lights. And now they're switching to LED lamps, which are now daylight, 5600K lights, and they're just as bad, but you need to have that coverage. Filters help. They really do, but they're not the fix. They're not the end-all fix. It's not going to, if you have an enormous amount of light pollution, a simple light filter is not going to fix the problem. So the best results are if you get away from the town and city lights into a nice and dark place. So that's the Salton Sea on the left, and then Neowise inside the Joshua Tree National Park just before sunrise. And those places are pretty dark. They're not bad. I've actually found that out past the Salton Sea is pretty darn dark. So the best seasons, well, whatever you can handle. What I like is in the summer, that's Lake Hemet. I like to get up there on the weekends, set up and now that I got a little trailer, I'll park someplace and set the rig up outside and enjoy the stars until I'm tired. And I'll crash out and wake up in the morning and then have my data and enjoy the nice cooler weather over there. Wintertime, I tend to stick to the deserts and just head out the 10 towards the east entrance to the park. I think Cottonwood Springs is up there, and it's a lovely dark place if you can get a campsite, because a lot of times they're full. But there's all kinds of little, I found nooks and crannies and dirt roads that I can disappear down in. Now, I'm comfortable with this because I'm kind of a big guy, and I always have a little something with me. But, you are remote. You are by yourself unless you bring somebody. So, and I'm outside of cell phone range, because I tend to want to get away from everything to be able to shoot images like I like. Another thing is the moon phases. The full moon can pretty much wash out the sky just as much as light pollution. So the best times to shoot broadband imagery is when it's the new moon, like tonight. Tonight is, I think yesterday was the new moon, and today's the first. There might be a sliver that just set already. But you really want to find, new moon is your best time, or shooting around the moon. The only exception, and this is an exception to light pollution a little bit too, is the narrowband imaging part I spoke about earlier, to where you're just taking small slices of the light spectrum and then creating a color image from that. It tends to not be affected as much by light pollution, because the little slices we're taking are not parts of what's creating the light pollution. We tend to stick to other parts of the light spectrum that aren't there, but it still impacts it. I have, in the next, some of the processing we'll go through on the third part, I'll show some light pollution gradients and the effects that they have, and then how we can use processing to try to minimize them. Almost can never remove them completely, but you can help them a lot, is the best way to put that. And optimal conditions, really kind of hover around. If it's windy, it's a good chance the sky is going to have seeing issues. So seeing, when I talk about seeing, is the atmosphere is moving. It's like looking down a long road on a hot day and you see the waves coming off of the ground. So that's happening in the skies too. And if the wind's blowing, it's likely it's moving the air above you, and it creates a lot of turbulence, and stars get puffier and bigger. They don't come to focus. So those kinds of conditions, you kind of, you want to, unless you're doing the camera, the long lenses won't be as effective, but say a wide field or a wide angle view, you'd probably be able to get away with that, as long as it's clear. But wind also shakes your stuff, so as it's blowing and it's wiggling your telescope, that's going to cause problems too, a lot of that stuff. Then software that helps us. So I'm a big fan of using the phone and getting out there, and I've kind of gotten lazy. I used to know the sky a lot better. Now I'm just like, what's out there? And I just kind of point it around and use that tool to help me look towards the stuff that I might want to be shooting that night. And these are great planning tools and help you figure out what's in the sky at what time during the night that you want to point your telescopes to. And one of the features of these modern mounts and telescope systems and the software that runs them, because just as they're sitting right here, they won't just take a picture. There's a computer on this one right here. It's just one of these mini computers here, and it's loaded up with all the software that it is needed to take pictures and drive the telescope. An innovation that I love is something called plate solving. What plate solving is the computer has a mathematical representation of what the sky is as a database. You take a picture of a part of the sky, and it breaks it down to that mathematical what stars are what, and then figures out what you're pointing at. So it will then tell the computer exactly what the telescope's pointing at. So if you're not pointing at what you want to, it will then adjust and move it around until it's pointing exactly what you want to point at. Made me real lazy. It's real simple to just say, I want to shoot M60s, and boom, and then it goes, bzzz, goes right to it and starts taking pictures. I don't really have to go outside and find that object anymore, but it really is handy as far as astrophotography goes to make sure you're looking at the right spot of the sky, because as the telescope passes the meridian, it's going to want to flip to the other side, and then it can reconfirm that it's looking exactly at where you left off and start taking pictures again. And that's the beauty of the software, of some of the softwares that are in here, and we will get deeper and deeper into that in the next one. And that's kind of it, folks. This last image here is not my last image I've shot, but it's the second to the last. And I got to tell you, that looks like a scene right out of Marvel movies or something to me. There's a guy standing on top of some sort of bridge. There's a cauldron or a dragon about to fire something out at the bottom. This is my Rorschach stuff. And then down here in the bottom, there's faces inside these dark channels. And I love just kind of staring and zooming into those segments and seeing all the wispiness and the detail comes out of it. And that's what's probably my main drive right now, is I love taking a shot of something and then exploring it and then trying to figure out what's going on. Because what's going on, let's see if I can make this work. Bloop. It will. So like that star right there that's sitting what looks like underneath the chin of a dragon or something, the forces that star could be creating, if it's where I think it is, it's kind of inside this dark material. It's probably a very young star, highly energetic, and its radiation and solar wind has blown the materials away from its where it was born, and now we're looking inside of a structure that has a star that's not that old, that's beginning to really crank up. And the different texture lines that you see in the materials around it, it looks like the wind's blowing a cloud. So it's the forces that shape these shapes and create these things are massive, because it's the stars that are producing them, but it's also an indication of how our universe has been rebuilding itself, or not rebirthing, but it takes a bunch of stuff, creates a new thing. And this is happening in more places than you might imagine. And that's kind of it. We can take a look at the telescopes, or if there's any questions or anything like that, I can try and address them. And this was meant to be sort of a beginning introduction into a lot of these things, so we cover a broad area of a lot of details. But it all kind of comes together in the next two presentations that will begin to show you how to acquire, how to actually use modern techniques to get polar alignments fairly accurate, and then how to actually start taking pictures, and then we'll get into how to put them together into pretty pictures like this, because it's software, and there's a lot of art to it. There is a technique. No matter what software package you might choose to use, they all use a similar technique to get to this point, and then at the last little few steps is where the art comes in, where you start to decide how much color, what colors do I want to enhance, what things you might want to change about stuff, or fix even, to create the best image you can. So there you go.
What image is that?
What is that? It's a piece of the Sol Nebula. I cropped into it. It's IC 1848, I think. So this is a much bigger structure. Let's see, I might be able to actually get into it. Where's the Sol? There we go. Let's see if I can bring this over to that monitor. Is it coming into it? Nope, other side. Oh, there it is, and then it disappeared. Oh, well. I was hoping I could probably pop one over there, but let's see here. Come on, there we go. So that's a wider view of it, kind of. The stuff that just grabs my mind and just shakes me up. I'm going to have to get up here and point at it, because I can't get. See that sort of floating blob that's just below that one top star at the very top? How that piece of material just got left out there all by itself. it must have been a much denser cloud of material, and the radiation, the solar wind around it was not able to dissipate it enough, and so it either blew it away as a chunk, or it's where it was and it just hasn't dissipated. How to read these things from a standpoint of like how light works. So your darker stuff, like this silhouetted, shadowy stuff, is material that's closer to us, so the light source is behind it. And you can kind of read that in most of the dark areas. You'll see, and what those are is just like a cloud that's blocking the light that's being created behind it. So it's not, you're not seeing through everything past it. It's something blocking the stuff behind it. And so like here at the bottom, you'll see that kind of action happening a whole lot more. Let's see if there's some more here. Where's the mouse? Let's see if I can get this one over there. Come on. We all know where this is. So if you know Orion, the 3 belt stars, the bottom belt star is that one that's on the left at the bottom there, the very bright one. And this is hydrogen alpha and oxygen mixed together for this one object. I do that technique a lot for my backyard because it helps. It's the light pollution. It helps me cut through it a little bit. I can still do a lot of things and not be affected by light pollution a lot. Now that really bright star is creating a halo. It's a very difficult place to photograph some places in there, and it'll create light flares and stuff like that in multiple places. You can kind of see one that's midway up on the left. Looks like there's shiny stuff, and the one on the top right, I think, let's see if is this image too big? Yeah. So, maybe I cropped that one out. But, so yeah, the good old horse head. And it's funny, you can see how the red material that's kind of back there, the contrast is a little high here, but it's like a wave. It has multiple layers of waves that are in the background back there. And all the dark material you're seeing, including the horse head, is dust that's in front of a light source, so we're seeing the silhouette of it. Yeah. So, any questions at all out there? Yes, sir.
What it costs to start this end versus that end?
Okay. So, well, the camera is always the expensive part. So, a simple tripod, what do you can get this fairly cheap. This is probably $50 or $40 from Amazon or something. The camera itself is just, really whatever camera you want to put on it, because this is stationary. It's as much of a camera as you would want to afford. So this would be the simplest system to get started with. And again, I wouldn't take anything like this beyond 50 millimeters of zoom. Just because you're going to start to see stars moving, and you won't get enough exposure to really start to see nebula too much. So this would be like 20-second exposures of the Milky Way with a tree in front of it, or a grand landscape-ish nighttime photo for this kind of thing. This one here, the polarity here, you can find star trackers nowadays from Skywatcher and iOptron and a few other places from between $200 and $400 for just this tracker part. Then it's a matter of whatever camera you want to put on it, that situation. And this can fit on this tripod. In fact, this polarity came with this tripod, but I prefer it on a little bit more of a sturdier system. And I added this sort of what do they call this? Yeah, well, it's the head. It's not a pan and tilt head. It's a photographic head, and it just happens to fit right on top. It screws into the piece that the polarity has. It works on itself. And this is really simple to polar align, just using a little hole that's right there. So, not counting camera, this is probably about, when they were new, they were 600, but you can probably find them used now for 300 to 400 range, probably. It's great. It runs on AA batteries, or you can plug in a little power bank that you have for your phones these days. It'll drive it all night. This system, I'm really in love with this little setup here, because the equatorial head itself is probably about $500, and it's got Wi-Fi, and it's go-to, and simple to